How many times has this happened to you? You shuffle up a deck of magic cards and play your first land. Maybe you have a 1-drop and you play that too. But what is this? Your opponent also gets to play a land and maybe a 1-drop? Vile blasphemy. For individuals who would prefer the Magic the Gathering experience to be more akin to solitaire than poker, combo decks are the way to go. Sure, that pesky opponent will get to do some things while you set your combo up, but once you have, they will never get to do another thing again. While you sit across the table and make them watch impotently as you play card after card, culminating in your eventual victory. That's where I come in. Johnny the Combo Player. Legally distinct from Johnny, Combo Player. Intellectual property of Wizards of the Coast. If you want to learn how to combo off in standard 2025, I'm the guy for you. I'll show you when to combo, when not to combo, what breaks your combo, and most importantly, how to combo. After I'm through teaching you the ins and outs of this deck, well, your win rate still might be pretty trash, but at least you'll lose with style. The first part of your setup involves a Reanimator-style game plan. But instead of bringing back a large, threatening creature, you bring back a small 1/1 flying Omniscience creature. This is accomplished by way of Abuelo's Awakening, cast for 4 mana. You can cast it for more if you want a bigger Omniscience, but you never really need that. While the body on this little guy is not overly imposing, it is, in fact, an Omniscience, meaning that all cards you cast from your hand are free, allowing you to just go hog wild, literally casting everything you can with no regard for mana cost. While the Omniscience is an Omniscience, it is also a 1/1 creature token, and can get got to removal spells. If this happens, you have to pay mana for your spells like a chump, and Johnny ain't no chump, so we have to do something about that. This is where the wish portion of the deck starts. Invasion of Arcavios allows you to tutor your library, graveyard, and sideboard for an instant or sorcery card. It costs 5. Usually too much mana to make it remotely viable, but we have an Omniscience. Costs mean nothing to us. Using the Invasion, the first thing that we usually tutor for is Season of Weaving. We cast it for free, both making a token copy of Omniscience and bouncing everything except for lands and tokens back to the respective players' hands. Luckily, at the same time you just made an Omniscience token, so that sticks around. Now you have a non-creature Omniscience on the battlefield, thus narrowing the applicable suite of removal spells. But the Omniscience creature you had in play is now back in your hand. Cast that next. Now they have to have 2 enchantment removal spells. We cast the Season first for 2 reasons. The first I alluded to earlier. We want to solidify our setup and make it as hard for them to break it up as possible. It is much easier to remove our 1/1 creature than it is to remove 2 enchantments, so it's preferable to have the latter. The second reason for the Season is the bounce effect. We are eventually going to win by attacking with creatures. A potentially absurd amount of creatures, but we still need to get our damage in via attacking. So the Season of Weaving serves to clear their board of creatures. They will still have their tokens, but we just made our path to victory much shorter. Now seems like a good a time as any to touch on how this deck is different on paper than on Arena. In Paper Magic, the act of comboing off can be accomplished as easily as speaking the words aloud. In Arena, there's a lot of clicking involved. You can't get timed out during your combo like you could with other combos in the past, but you still do have to click on a bunch of buttons, so there's an opportunity to fumble by way of misclicking. So don't do that. That is another part of the reason why we Season first. If they have an empty board and less than 23 life, you have to repeat the cycle I'm about to describe 6 times. You need to repeat an additional time for every 1 blocker they have and 3 life they have. Casting the Season first just ends up saving you time in the long run. A quick disclaimer about the Season though. If you have a weird Omniscience setup, you can mess this up by casting the Season. So before you do anything, always just make sure you aren't messing up and shooting yourself in the foot. But without further ado, let's get into the main part of the combo, the loop. The loop leverages the fact that all of your spells are able to be cast for free and recycles 2 cards over and over again, creating a 2/2 every time. The first card is the one we spoke of earlier, Invasion of Arcavios. As previously stated, this card allows one to tutor their sideboard, deck, and graveyard. After you set up your Omniscience, you will wish again and search your sideboard for the second part of the loop, Unnerving Grasp. Then, you'll cast Unnerving Grasp, bouncing the Invasion back to your hand and Manifest Dread. looking at the top 2 cards of your library and making one of them a 2/2 while putting the other into your graveyard, along with the copy of Unnerving Grasp. Cast the Invasion again, this time tutoring your graveyard, and return the Unnerving Grasp to your hand. Rinse and repeat as necessary, usually about 6 to 8 times. You can theoretically do it until you run out of cards in your deck, but what vile cretin would sink to such levels of depravity? But Johnny, you may be saying, none of these creatures have haste. Now my opponent gets to do stuff. You said I would be the only one doing stuff. To that I say, we'll get there when we get there. And we get there now. After you cast Unnerving Grasp an appropriate amount of times, we will once again cast the Invasion and once again wish. This time we will scour our sideboard for a card called Heroic Reinforcements. Still for free, we will cast this card, creating 2 1/1 tokens and giving everything +1/+1 in haste. Swing for lethal and win. But before you can start comboing, you need to set it up. Sure, getting Omniscience is technically setting up your primary combo, but with this deck, you'll need to set up the setup. The 3 cards you need are Omniscience, Abuelo's Awakening, and Invasion of Arcavios. You want the Omniscience in your graveyard and the other 2 in your hand. Every other card in the deck serves to facilitate finding these 3 pieces in one way or another. Some are pure card advantage cards like Chart a Course and Moment of Truth, while others serve dual functions. Fallaji Archaeologist and Picklock Prankster are used to mill yourself until you find the piece that you need, but also come with bodies that can be used as speed bumps if the deck across the table is putting on more pressure than you are comfortable with. Ephara's Dispersal is good against the same type of threat. It bounces an attacking creature for 1 and surveils 2, giving you an opportunity to get cards that you don't want cleared away, or allowing you to get your Omniscience into the graveyard where you want it. Confounding Riddle is good because of its versatility. It can dig deep and get the combo piece you need where you want it. Or it can be used to counter a spell unless its controller pays 4. The counterspell portion is a nice bit of protection if you animate the Omniscience and they try to remove it, because they usually only have 1 answer and can't pay the 4 to make it resolve. However, if you have multiple copies of the riddle in hand and or really need to find a combo piece, this card can serve that function as well. Using these resources, get your combo pieces where they need to be, and as soon as you are reasonably certain you can combo safely, start going off. Emphasis on safely. The combo we are using in this deck is not the most fragile combo to have ever been played, but if you are not careful, it can be disrupted. The specificity of this disruption is different to one degree or another, depending on which deck you are facing off against. Against aggro decks, your goal is simple. Don't die. The only ways that you can stop incoming pressure is by either using your speed bump creatures or by way of Ephara's Dispersal. The latter isn't even removal, it's just a bounce spell. So anything that you cast it on is likely coming right back in the next couple turns unless it's a token. The good news is that this type of deck is the least likely to disrupt your combo, because more often than not, they are tapped out when you start going off. There's a balance to be struck here, mitigating what damage you can while still finding your combo pieces as quickly as possible. Check out this game versus Boros tokens. The deck aims to go wide and then alpha strike by giving its multitude of creatures +1/+0 in haste. The game starts off with me playing a tap land and sending my Omniscience to the yard. I also have my Awakening in hand, so all I have to do is find my Invasion and survive until turn 4. In theory. My opponent widens their board and I cast the spell I'd been saving, looking at the top 3 cards of my library and putting the Archaeologist into my hand. On my turn, I play the Archaeologist and get a Dispersal off its trigger, keeping a land up to cast it if the need arises. That need arises sooner rather than later as the opponent slaps down a recruiter, buffing a squad and sending them at my face. I bounce the 3/3 and block some of the 2/1s. I take some damage, but this board state really illustrates my point about the speed bumps and the Dispersal. I don't need to get any tempo for myself, I just need to survive until I can combo, so all I have to do is mitigate damage until that happens. When the turn comes back to me, I decide to just Leroy Jenkins and get a total of 3 Omnisciences into play. 1 reanimated as a creature, and 2 additional free ones that I cast from hand. The goal with this play was not to get all of the enchantments onto the battlefield, but to use the Archaeologist trigger to hopefully find my invasion. Or, failing that, find me more draw spells that I could play for free, enabling me to continue digging and hopefully eventually find said invasion. Instead, I just slam down the trio of enchantments and pass the turn. My opponent pouts for a moment that all of my spells are free 3 times over, but proceeds to play and buff some of the creatures, more than likely gearing up for another Alpha Strike. Back to me, and I draw and play another land. At least it's a Surveil land, allowing me to get rid of the Fabled Passage that has found its way to the top of my library. Not 100% a dead draw for me, but nothing that I really need. This also puts on display how lackluster Omniscience is with no follow-up. Yeah, it's cool that everything is free, but lands are always free. My intuition about my opponent preparing another Alpha Strike was correct. They crew up a vehicle, drop another recruiter, and swing. I block what I can, including with my Omniscience. I've got 2 more in play, so this 1/1 flyer is just another blocker at this point. When the dust settles, I'm left with just a single Archaeologist and 9 life. On my turn, I draw another Dispersal. Still no invasion or draw cards. I pass the turn and really hope that the opponent doesn't get me. I bounce one of the creatures coming at me and Surveil to put the invasion on top of my deck. This attack hadn't killed me, but 1 more would. As we are moving into main phase 2, I am really just hoping that my opponent taps out, so I will feel more safe when I attempt to combo off next turn. The opponent does just that and passes the turn back to me. With the player across the table unable to interact, I combo off and win the game with 4 life. Mid-range decks are not your ideal matchup. They often have creatures that have no regard for the speed bumps that you put up, and they also tend to have better ways to disrupt your combo. Post-sideboard in most matchups, the opponent will invariably bring in some graveyard hate, which I will address later, but some of the mid-range decks that I ran into had graveyard hate in the main board. The broad plan against mid-range decks is to very aggressively search for your pieces with some degree of disregard for your life total. This archetype of deck will take a little bit longer to kill you than a straight up aggro deck, so hopefully your life total will remain above 0 until you get your combo. In this matchup, it is also more important to not only combo, but make sure that you can combo safely. It only takes 1 bit of well-timed spot removal to destroy your combo attempt, so play accordingly. Ideally, waiting until the opponent is tapped out to go off, even if it means taking a few swings to the face while you wait for your opportunity. Let's look at this game versus Golgari midrange. I keep a 5-lander with an Omniscience and a Moment of Truth. I'm not thrilled about the deficit of spells, but I have a combo piece in hand, not in the graveyard though, and a way to start digging through my deck to find the others. My opponent plays a 3/2 and passes. I draw a Picklock Prankster. In the aggro matchup, this fairy could serve as a reasonable blocker, but the creature gets chewed up by the 3/2 knight, making it less than ideal here. The opponent develops a Preacher of the Schism, and I cast the instant part of the fairy in response, finding my Awakening. 2 pieces assembled so far, but my Prankster still dies to the Death Touch on the Preacher, meaning it can still only block 1 thing before it dies. Instead of playing the creature as an impotent blocker, I keep my lands up with the intention of casting a Dispersal and digging a little bit more. The opponent attacks and I bounce the Preacher, putting both of the surveilled cards into the graveyard. I contemplate keeping the Awakening as a backup plan, but I really just need to find the invasion and a way to get the Omniscience into the yard as quickly as possible. The opponent tries to gut my hand but whiffs. At the end of my turn, I do my digging. No invasion, but there is a Confounding Riddle. I get that in hopes that it will either allow me to counter something important or acquire the invasion that I am quickly becoming in more and more desperate need of. Back to me, and I cast the instant half of Picklock Prankster, milling the invasion that I needed. Free the Fae can only grab instants and sorceries, which is useful when one is looking for an awakening, but less so when looking for an invasion. I pass, leaving mana open to continue my search, now with a lower chance of finding what I need. The search at the end of my opponent's turn does yield the invasion, but I still cannot combo. I have the Omniscience that I need, but it is in my hand. I need Chart a Course to get it into the graveyard, or I need to mill myself until another copy winds up there. I bounce the Preacher and Surveil, getting this additional copy of Omniscience into the yard. I'm at 2, but I can combo next turn and protect the token with Confounding Riddle. Unfortunately, instead of replaying the Preacher, my opponent drops a Sheoldred. Though I would have been able to win on my turn, my last 2 life points fall away when I draw and I lose the game. Control decks are few and far between in the current meta. Aether Drift came out halfway through me filming this, so it is possible that something will change, but the only real control deck to speak of is still Zur. Occasionally, there will be some dimmer mill list, but from what I saw, Zur is still the premier control deck. So let's talk about the Zur deck. The matchup is somewhere in between aggro and mid-range in terms of difficulty. For the most part, they leave you alone early, which is nice, but they also have semi-robust answers to your combo in the form of leyline bindings and other spot removal cards. My advice for this matchup would be similar to the advice given against mid-range decks. Focus on getting your pieces early and play fast and loose with your life total. Then, when it is safe, combo off. In this Zur match, I keep a 2-lander with 2 copies of Omniscience in hand. The lands are fine because I don't care about them coming into play tapped, and I can pitch one of the Omnisciences that I have in hand with one of the Chart a Courses that I also have. It's game 2, so I already know that I'm playing against Zur, and I don't really have to worry about early pressure. The first couple of turns are a staring contest until it gets to my turn 2. I play an untapped land and draw some cards with the Chart a Course, pitching the Omniscience along the way. The opponent plays a Hauntlord of the Flood Pits, drawing cards but still applying no real pressure. That is what is so nice about the control matchup. Oftentimes, you can just do whatever you want during the first couple turns, and by the time they start playing threatening things, you are decently close to having your combo and protecting it. With my opponent on a hiatus from pressure, I cast some instants at sorcery speed. I could have bluffed having a counterspell, but it's game 2 and he knows what I'm playing and knows that I probably don't have the counter. Back to the opponent and they play Rest in Peace, exiling my graveyard. Furthermore, this card makes anything that would have hit the yard become exiled instead. Now I have to deal with this before I pitch the second copy of Omniscience that I have in hand. They follow up with a creature that can sacrifice to destroy target enchantment. I mentioned that this is game 2, and the sideboard hate that my opponent put into their deck is on full display here. On my turn, I cast an Archaeologist and get a Confounding Riddle that I don't have mana to cast. I continue to dig with Moment of Truth and am offered a Prankster and 2 invasions. I get the Prankster into hand with the intention of using it to keep digging for answers. I put 1 invasion at the bottom of my library and exile the other. Across from me, an Overlord of the Mistmoors comes down and generates 2 2/1 flyers. The pressure was not on earlier, but it's beginning to be applied. Not only do I have creatures to deal with, but I can't do anything until that Rest in Peace is gone. On my turn, I just keep digging, exiling another copy of Omniscience. When the time is right, I can pitch the Omniscience in hand with the Chart a Course that I also have in hand, so it's not the biggest loss. I also pick up the Awakening. All of my combo pieces are acquired. I just need the board to be in a proper state for me to cast them. My opponent attacks and gets me for 4. I'm still at 20, so my life total is in no real danger. In the second main phase, they decide to impend the second blue Overlord and draw a card by sacrificing their creature. It seems as if they are also searching for something. If I were to guess, it would be a Zur, but who knows. Back to me, and I draw the exercise that I need to kill the Rest in Peace. I do just that and follow up with a Chart a Course, putting my third copy of Omniscience into the yard. This is kind of a risky play though. If my opponent follows up by exiling my graveyard now, it's actually just game over for me. But they do not have such a card. They cast another large enchantment creature and leave a land open that potentially represents the Leyline binding that would stuff my combo. On my turn, I open up with a Grand Abolisher, disabusing them of any notions of interaction and combo off, winning the game. I touched upon it briefly while discussing the last game, but one thing to keep in mind while playing this deck is the sheer amount of combo hate that comes in post-board. It's not insurmountable, but it certainly makes the life of a combo player more irritating. The most common avenue that one will encounter is the addition of graveyard hate. This comes in the form of cards like Rest in Peace, Soul Guide Lantern, and other similar cards. When an opponent plays one of these cards, said card needs to be dealt with before attempting to combo off. To do this, one needs to preemptively sideboard in cards that will serve such a purpose. Exorcise is the go-to solution for all of your graveyard woes. It hits Rest in Peace, the most common card that will be boarded in against you. It's a little bit slow, being a sorcery, but it will accomplish what you need to accomplish in this regard. Another often overlooked solution is Temporary Lockdown. This is an essential sideboard card in the aggro matchup, but it exiles all types of permanents, not just creatures. So this is also a reasonable way to deal with cards that cost 2 or less that exile the graveyard. While exiling graveyards is the most common way of disrupting your combo, it is not the best way for the opponent to do so. What really backbreaks the deck are effects that remove all copies of any given card from the library. Stonebrain is a primary example of such a card. While one is able to play around and remove cards like Rest in Peace and such, Stonebrain is usually played and cracked in the same turn, leaving little room for response. Furthermore, if the brain removes all copies of Omniscience from the deck, the combo player effectively loses. It's rare enough that it's not the biggest of issues, but if an opponent removes all copies of Omniscience from your graveyard and library, it might not be the worst idea to just scoop them up and go on to the next game. Well, there you have it. Omniscience combo in a nutshell. If you want to tilt your opponents by forcing them to watch you play with yourself for several minutes, you now have the tools at your disposal to do just that. Well, sometimes. In the matches that I played with this deck, I was able to combo off 53 times. Of the times that I comboed, the opponent scooped up their cards 41 times. Meaning that once you start comboing, there's a 77% chance that the player across from you will just take their ball and go home. This leads to the final question. Is the deck good? The answer to that is maybe. I ended my 50 matches with a 42% win rate, which is decidedly not good. That being said, this and similar lists are top 8 in tournaments with some degree of frequency, so there is probably something to this pile. As far as ladder climbing goes, I would say that this deck is probably significantly better in best of 1, when the opponent can't put in a plurality of cards to shut you down in game 2. I noticed that in game 1 my opponents sometimes had no idea what my deck is trying to do until it's too late. So if there is no second or third game, one could theoretically just combo off on unsuspecting players more effectively. Either way, the deck is fun to play if you enjoy tilting your opponents. The high scoop rate speaks to that. But don't take my word for it. Hop on the ladder and try it out for yourself. Or don't. I'm not your boss.